Good morning. I'm Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, and I thank you for being here for some important information and announcements regarding the data security of all New Yorkers. I'm joined by Laura Eric, AARP's Associate State Director of Engagement, and by Lynette Baker, the Director of Outreach and Marketing for Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Rochester, and I thank them both for joining us as we release our 2017 data breach report. Data security is in the news a lot. It's been in the news a lot lately in connection with Facebook's connection to the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica, which appears to have improperly possessed the personal data of more than 50 million Facebook users. We are investigating that matter in conjunction with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. We are also always looking for forward-thinking ways to protect the data and privacy of New Yorkers going forward, because as people here in Rochester know, the consequences of data breaches are not confined to politics. Data breaches cause personal crises for New Yorkers every time they hit. When a data breach happens, personal information, social security numbers, credit card numbers, and other sensitive data are available to be put on the black market and auctioned off to the highest bidder. Criminals buy New Yorkers' stolen data so they can take out fraudulent loans, run up bad debts on someone else's dime. This drives down credit scores and can really destroy an individual's financial life. So the report today that we're issuing shows that the problem is only getting worse, and it's really worth looking at this report in the context of the trend that we've seen over the last few years of increasing numbers of data breaches and increasing volume of personal data that has been exposed. So our office received a record-breaking 1,583 data breach reports in 2017, up more than 23% from 2016. The 2017 breaches exposed the personal records of 163 million individuals in the U.S., including 9.2 million New Yorkers. That's more than 4 times as many New Yorkers as in 2016. So there's a fourfold increase in the number of New Yorkers whose data was exposed over the previous year. The information that was breached consisted overwhelmingly of Social Security numbers, accounting for 40% of records exposed, followed by financial account information, such as credit card numbers, accounting for 33% of records exposed. Hacking was the leading cause of the data security breaches at 44%, with another 25% of breaches due to negligence. In 2017, the exposure rate of New Yorkers' personal information was the highest since our office started receiving data breach notices in 2006. More than 90% of the reported personal data exposures in 2017 was attributable to the mega breach at the consumer reporting agency Equifax. But smaller breaches harm consumers as well, and they are occurring much more frequently. Last May, Chipotle restaurant suffered a breach exposing customers' credit and debit card numbers, including at 4 locations here in the Rochester area, and there were hundreds of breaches affecting fewer than 10 people each that never made the news. As we can see, the number of data breaches is rising, the exposure of New Yorkers is rising, and we're here to report on that, and our report does provide recommendations for businesses and for consumers on what you can do to protect your data. But we really need to move beyond voluntary efforts, and that's why we are going to work very hard between now and the end of the legislative session to try and get Albany to act to protect against hacks and other data breaches. New York's current data security law is outdated and toothless. It doesn't even require companies to maintain reasonable data security unless the company collects social security numbers. Companies also aren't even required to report breaches of many critical data types, including username and password combinations and biometric data like the fingerprint you use to unlock an iPhone. This is why I introduced late last year the Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security, or SHIELD Act, which would finally establish common sense data standards for companies both big and small. Our office is also working on legislation to require companies like Facebook to notify us and consumers as soon as they learn that users' personal data has been misused, because the systems are different with social networks, that requires a different piece of legislation. But there's no reason to wait to pass the SHIELD Act. Every business that chooses to store sensitive information has a moral responsibility to maintain reasonable safeguards for that data. And if we pass this legislation, they would have a legal responsibility as well. We've worked with the business community in crafting the SHIELD Act. The standards, while they would apply to any business that holds personal information of New Yorkers, the standards are tailored to the sensitivity of the data and the size and complexity of the business. A mom and pop hardware store would be expected to comply with very different standards than a big multi-million-dollar firm. Data breaches are a problem, but they are a problem we can do something about. And we really do believe that this is the time and this is the session to take up the SHIELD Act. So we are here to talk about our report, and we're also here to kick off the campaign to pass the SHIELD Act by the end of the legislative session. It is the right solution to the right problem. We are doing multi-state investigations. In some cases here, Equifax is a good example. Facebook will be another. And quite frankly, New York's laws are behind those of quite a few other states. So it's time for us to take further steps to protect New Yorkers' data. We really should make New York a national model for data security and give families and businesses the confidence to live and do business in our state. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Laura Eric, AARP's Associate State Director of Engagement.
It's great to partner with Attorney General Schneiderman and state legislative sponsor Senator Carlucci and Assemblyman Titone to advocate for the SHIELD law. If ever New Yorkers needed this legislative protection, it's now. We're all becoming more and more vulnerable to the data breaches the Attorney General's report really details. Scam artists are becoming more sophisticated, and efforts to hack systems are becoming more widespread. What's truly stunning in this report is that 9.2 million New Yorkers were impacted by breaches this past year alone. That's over half of the adult population of New York State. The SHIELD law would be an important step in our ongoing war against fraud by establishing a legal responsibility for companies to adopt reasonable safeguards for sensitive data, and by expanding the types of data that trigger reporting requirements. In addition, all of us should do what we can individually to protect ourselves. At AARP, we have a couple of basic suggestions that everyone should be able to follow. First of all, don't give out personal and financial information over the phone to somebody who calls you. Second, don't give strangers remote access to your computer unless you're the one who initiated contact with a reputable technology assistance firm. AARP also offers the Fraud Watch Network. It's an online tool that's available to anyone, which helps to arm you with the resources and tools that you need to spot and to avoid scams. And next month, after you file your taxes, AARP, in partnership with the Attorney General and with other elected officials around the state, are launching a series of free document shredding events across the entire state. There'll be similar events going on every place in the country. It's AARP's way of helping Americans safely dispose of sensitive documents that identity thieves view as pure gold. So make sure to go to aarp.org/NYStopScams to see where and when a shredding event is happening near you. And again, I really want to thank the Attorney General and Senator Carlucci and Assemblyman Titone, and to pledge that AARP, along with our volunteers, will work with you to get this bill passed and signed into law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from Lynette Baker, the Director of Outreach and Marketing for Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Rochester.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. As Mr. Schneiderman just said, the occurrence of data breach notices have increased to a record level last year. Identity thieves are getting more creative, and with the abundance of technology that we all use, they are getting more sophisticated in their attempts to hack into private information using this technology. At Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Rochester, we talk to people almost every day who have had their information compromised, and they need to know how to do this, and they want help, because most people don't know where to go next. So I just want to talk about how identity theft affects the victim, and then I'll give you some tips on how to avoid identity theft. So there are many impacts that in many ways that it impacts you when you have your identity stolen. Your accounts can be frozen until things are straightened out and the financial institution is sure that you are the owner of that account. Your credit score can also be affected. And as we all know, credit scores are so important, and they're important in the short term. Your credit score can have many implications, such as the interest rate that you can get for a loan. The higher your credit score, the lower the interest rate you're going to get on that loan. It also affects whether you can even get a loan at all. And while the victims are not liable for bills accumulated by the imposters, thanks to federal law, they do have the anxiety and frustration of spending months and sometimes even years regaining their financial health and restoring their good credit history. But there are steps that you can take to avoid your information being stolen by identity thieves. None of these are foolproof because you can't control how somebody else protects your privacy when they have your information, but at least you have a fighting chance whenever you're in control of it. So at this time of year, it's so important to file your taxes early. If you haven't done it, do it now, because the identity thieves will try to file a false tax report in your name to get your tax refund. Then when you go and file your tax refund, the IRS will say, oh, well, somebody else already filed a tax refund in your name, so you have to dig your way out of that. It's best to also have that refund direct deposited into your account. Don't have a check sent to your mailbox. Create strong passwords and change them often. With the amount of technology that we use today and the internet and all the devices that we have information on, it's so important to secure these devices so that thieves can't get your stored information. Make sure the websites you use for purchases are secure. There's a few ways that you can find out this. Obviously, if it's a big, well-known website, you can feel secure about that. But a secured site will start with HTTPS instead of just HTTP. And some of them also use a padlock icon in that search bar. You can check their privacy policies and always look for ways to opt out of information sharing. Only give them what they need to know. A lot of them try to get you to have a register for an account on their website. If you don't have to, don't do it. Monitor your bank, credit card, medical, any financial statements that you get, and be sure to shred these when you're ready to discard them. Don't just throw them in the garbage. Check your credit report often. Use annualcreditreport.com. You can request one free report each year from each of the 3 credit reporting agencies. So if you can spread these out, request one and then from another and then from another, so that throughout the year you can look at your credit report 3 times. Beware of unsolicited calls and phishing emails. You'll get a lot of these. I'm sure we've all gotten them. Don't respond to them with any personal information. If you think it might be a legitimate request, find a phone number on the back of your credit card, on your bank statement, that you know and that you trust that phone number is the right one, and call. But most legitimate companies typically don't request information in this way. And above all else, protect your social security number. Many places ask for your social. Most don't need it. I'll give an example of something that happened in my household recently. My son was taking the SAT. So these standardized tests used for college admission is an example. They will ask for your social security number. They don't need it. Don't give it to them. So always be in control of this piece of information above all else. Don't give it out to anybody who doesn't need it. And you can ask them why. If they're asking for it, why do you need it? And if they don't have a great reason, or it's a reason that really isn't okay with you, and it's not required, and you don't believe they need it, don't give it out. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So control your own data, and we hope we'll get support to pass the SHIELD Act so there's more requirements for companies to protect your data when it's in their control. With that, we'll take questions. If you'd identify yourself to Amy.
Start with on-topic questions, then and please understand by name and outcome.
Sure. How are you? I'm Amanda Valdez with 13 WAM. You touched a little bit upon some companies in Rochester that were affected by data breaches. Can you go into that a little bit further, and are there any other local companies that we might, that you know about that we might learn about today?
Well, the report doesn't provide as much detail about individual companies. It works on categories because there are so many data breaches. And one of the things that is important to understand is that out of the 1,583 data breaches reported this past year, 781 of them affected only 1 to 9 people. So this is the Chipotle breach was not a huge breach, but if they've got your credit card or debit card number, it's a problem. So we can identify some more companies that were affected, but increasingly with people working on the internet and ordering online, it's less of a localized problem. It tends to be a chain. Chipotle was breached all over the place. Just happens that 4 were in Rochester. So we could probably help identify some other things, but it is none of this is limited by geography anymore. If you're ordering something online or you're ordering food online, that you're exposed, and you're exposed to national hackers. You're not just exposed to local hackers. No one's going after. I mean, unlikely that someone will go after one Chipotle. They're breaking into the Chipotle system for as many franchises as they can get.
Deanna Dewberry with News 10 NBC. What gives the shield law teeth? So the requirement is that companies have reasonable safeguards, right? And also that they report breaches. If they fail to do so, what would the shield law be?
So we have no requirement now that companies provide reasonable safeguards. There are other states that do, we don't. So the shield law would impose that and would define the safeguards according to ongoing federal standards that are updated by the federal government regularly, called the NIST standards. So if a company would comply with that, they would get a safe harbor from any litigation by our office. So it's an incentive. We're providing both a carrot and a stick. You can be penalized if you don't meet the standards, and you can be penalized if you don't report a data breach, and it substantially increases the woefully inadequate fines under the current law. But we also provide an incentive for companies. That's why I say this is something we worked on with the cooperation of the business community. So it would create an incentive for companies to have this gold-plated set of security policies, and then they get a safe harbor from litigation. So it's really a win-win, and it does substantially increase the fines as well. But we are optimistic that we can get support for this year. The number of people affected by this, I mean, I'm sure all of us know someone whose identity was stolen, and it is an epidemic in this country. And for New York State to have a law that simply says, I can fine you, a few $1,000s for delay in reporting, that's a 2005 law that is very, very far behind the times in terms of technology, in terms of the work of data thieves.
One quick follow-up. Have you had any opposition from the small mom and pop who says, I can't afford these safeguards?
Not really. I mean, we're working with folks in the business community to have them understand it, the Retail Alliance. It's really more, we're dealing more with the trade associations, but we think that the law is designed so that we take into account the size and sophistication of the business. We're not going to require a mom and pop store to have the same standards that Equifax should have, and that hopefully when we're done with our investigation and litigation with Equifax, that they will undertake as a part of a settlement agreement.
Any more updates with Facebook and Cambridge? Have you talked to Mark Zuckerberg or anything?
We have been in contact. I have spoken to people at Facebook, and my staff has spoken to them many times. We're doing a joint investigation with Maura Healey, the Massachusetts Attorney General. We've sent them a letter demanding documents and information, a lot of documents and information about all of their policies historically on privacy, what the representations were to consumers, what happened when they discovered that the information of more than 50 million Facebook users had been compromised by Cambridge Analytica in 2015 and then didn't give anyone notice. So we're digging in on this, and thus far they have said they want to be cooperative. They've already begun to produce documents, so they're moving pretty quickly. And look, we're going to get to the bottom of this. I'm not sure that what's going to happen with federal inquiries if federal government is not as anxious to do investigations of big companies as they were once. So we're proceeding on the state level to ensure that this goes forward and that New Yorkers have confidence that they're protected on Facebook as they should be protected when they do business with merchants in New York. So it is ongoing. Thus far, they have expressed the desire to be very cooperative.
Brian Sharp with the Democratic Chronicle. this talks about businesses. Do you have any, or can you assess the state of New York state government and local government's security of their data?
It's a really, really important issue. It's something that we're working on. I think probably most of you saw the ransomware attack on the city of Atlanta that took place, which is really an extraordinary event in sort of law enforcement and government history. But the city of Atlanta was hacked. All of their systems were shut down. They had to pay money to this sketchy group of hackers. So yes, that could happen here, and I'm talking with my counterparts in government about this. I've been in contact with people who run big cybersecurity firms in New York about best steps, and I think there will probably be programs that some of those firms will offer to government entities tailored for their use. But the possibility of them hacking into a city system or a county or a state agency is really serious, and it is a tough situation to avoid paying the blackmail, because if you're running a police department, you can't have a week of downtime where you're trying to figure this out and how to reboot your systems. You just can't do that. So it is something we take seriously, and the Atlanta example should be a wake-up call for governments all across the nation.
On-topic questions?
I have one. Tiana Manion, WXXI News. I know the SHIELD ad doesn't totally cover smaller businesses because it can't all of the different resources there. But in here it says that it's clear that breaches come in all sizes. No organization is exempt from the risk of a data breach. What are your plans to bridge that gap then if all organizations, all businesses pose a risk?
Well, there are requirements for all businesses. It's just that they're graduated, they're tailored requirements. So every company is going to have reasonable measures to protect your data. One of the major ways to protect data is for companies not to ask for more information they need. That was alluded to earlier, but there are a lot of companies that are collecting and hanging on to information that is absolutely unnecessary. So under the SHIELD Act, if you're a small business and adopting these policies, one of the main things you'd have to do is just, if you need a credit card number, you need a credit card number. You don't need a social security number. You don't need passwords or anything else. And there, I don't think this is malevolent, but there is a tendency by some companies to collect more information than they actually need to conduct business. So there would be graduated standards for different businesses, but every business would have to upgrade their systems under the SHIELD Act.
Robert with Spectrum News. I have 4 questions, but let me give you this first one. I was given 4 questions. There's been an alleged breach at Finger Lakes Health, forcing them to do everything on paper. What's the AG's office doing to prevent things like this from happening?
This is, again, a great example of what happens with hacking and why we need to have uniform standards for data security. I mean, this is, again, the vulnerability of our systems, whether it's a government or a healthcare enterprise, is the same problem. They can't say, okay, we're going downtime, you can't make your appointments, you can't keep your appointments, because they have no choice but to try and deal with the problem. And this is, again, a reason that we really need to pass the SHIELD Act. I mean, it's can't be more simple than that.
What do you say to New Yorkers who are concerned about having their information compromised?
That we have tips for consumers here, and some of them were mentioned earlier. There's a lot you can do to protect your data. There are a lot of folks who just are very sloppy about passwords, who give out information they don't need to give out. You have to educate yourself and act, but then we also have to impose legal requirements so that businesses will take further steps to protect your data. This is going to happen, and it's important for everyone, consumers and businesses alike, to understand this is going to happen. We sometimes people are slow to adjust to new technology, but we're approaching the point where the epidemic of identity theft and the dangers of hacking are just so substantial. We have to take action.
Are there any further tips you might have for consumers about their identity?
I mean, it's all in our report. We recommend that people are in touch with our office, in touch with the Federal Trade Commission. We give contact information in the report, advice about what to do with your passports. Don't store them electronically. Don't post sensitive information on social media. A lot of people post information on social media that they just shouldn't be posting. So good advice, and then propose legislative solutions also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On-topic questions?
Brian Sharp, just to loop back around, does this law apply to local, we've talked about local governments, does this law apply to local governments, or do they
This is a business-oriented law, but the governments that we really should have a statewide program for compliance with local governments, and that's something I'm talking to my counterparts in government about. I mean, this is, there are different systems and different standards. There are government agencies that do require certain type of data. Healthcare is a great example. There are different privacy laws regarding that information, so there really has to be a separate set of systems tailored to government. But that's a very high priority. I appreciate your asking about it.
Off-topic questions?
Amanda Valdez with 13 not too long ago, we heard that you are teaming up with the State Education Commissioner in regards to Trayvon Rowe. What can you tell us as far as your investigation, where you guys are right now? Why did you guys decide to do this?
Well, we had a request from people here that what happened to Trayvon Rowe was clearly a case of broken systems failing this child, and in a way that raised questions about how the systems are working every day. So we determined that we should partner with State Education Department that has expertise in the operations of schools. We're at the very early stages of the investigation. We're getting documents, we're interviewing witnesses, and we're going to proceed forward and do a fair and impartial and thorough investigation. I think we are talking to some people actually today, and we want to hopefully get this resolved. We would like to resolve this by the end of the school year. The parents of children here in Rochester have to know that their kids can go to school safely, and that they are being monitored, and that there are grown-ups looking out for them and making sure they are where they're supposed to be.
Just a quick follow-up question. I know that you guys said you're at the very beginning stages of your investigation, but could you tell us if any of you have found any procedures or policies that may need changing so far as you guys have done?
I think until we get further down the road, I'm not going to comment on ongoing investigation. We're just starting out, and we're going to look at documents. We're going to talk to witnesses. We're going to make sure we find out what's actually going on, what's really happening before we make recommendations.
Keisha Bailey with Channel 8 News. In regards to Trayvon Rowe, there was also a GoFundMe page that was in question, and just the community, raised over $26,000, and then for those funds to not, go to the family because of bad things that are happening behind the scenes with, issues with the family. Once again, here is a public platform that people are donating money to. Can you talk about how could the Attorney General's office protect its citizens from, these GoFundMe pages?
Well, this is a real challenge, because anyone can set up a GoFundMe page, and this is an area that really isn't policed as well as it should be by some of the platforms. But everyone should be very careful in identifying GoFundMe pages and make sure that they are run by legitimate people who are concerned with this. Again, there was a comment made about identifying phone calls. It's good to identify individuals with an actual location, address, and phone number who are associated with the GoFundMe page. We see this with nonprofits a lot that we were very heavily involved in regulating. People will set up a nonprofit for victims or cancer patients or whatever, and you have to do your homework. There's no requirement that all of that money actually go through. So we appreciate people's compassion, desire to help out, but you got to be a smart customer, and you got to be a smart donor as well.
Will there be more regulations around these type of organizations like GoFundMe?
This is something that is an ongoing area of dispute in Washington, because it really is a national problem. It's not crosses state lines, so it's difficult to do it at the state level. But people just have to be, any new platform you should approach with care, and we appreciate everyone's generosity, but you got to be a smart consumer and a smart donor.
Speaking of Washington.
Sorry, we're gonna go here and then we're gonna go.
Thanks. For many months, News 10 NBC has been investigating contractors who are accused of defrauding consumers across many, many counties. And so consumers' complaints have been that when they go to local authorities, that they have a hard time getting the attention of local authorities, because that local police officer or that county DA may not be aware of the scope of the problem. There are 3 cases in this county, 4 cases in this one, and 6 in this one. Can you speak to what the AG's office can do to assuage this kind of criminal behavior that is persistent. In the case of one contractor, he's gone to prison before for this very thing. He's now out, and he is doing the same thing for multiple consumers across nations.
I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah, we work with our colleagues in law enforcement, and we've brought quite a few actions against fraudulent contractors and people. We encourage people to contact our office if you're defrauded. We're in touch with the district attorney's office, and there's an ongoing investigation of that particular matter. But we have pursued people and forced them to pay back a lot of money. In some cases where they are persistent repeat offenders, people get jail time. So it's something we're very aware of. Again, this is good side of technology. With technology that exists now, it is easier for local prosecutors and law enforcement agencies to stay informed about folks who may have committed the same kind of fraud in another jurisdiction. But we're in touch with our counterparts about that and have taken quite a few actions. And again, if people are defrauded by a contractor, you can go to our website, we have a whole narrative about that, complaint forms available.
Does it have to rise to a certain level? Like, do you have to have, a dozen consumers? Or do you see what I'm saying, before the AG's office takes action?
I mean, we look at every complaint in and of itself. If it's an isolated incident, most often it's left with local authorities. But if we see a pattern of misconduct, there's no magic number. We take action, and we've dealt with home contractors, snow plowing services, people who come in after natural disasters and claim to try and help you with your property. And we've been very aggressive about it. Some folks just don't give up, and you have to keep chasing them. But we have caught up with some, and again, there are those who are real bad actors who get jail time for this. This is not a crime we take lightly.
President Trump supporters say you continue to sue the administration purely out of political motivation. How do you respond to that, and how much are these suits costing New York State taxpayers?
Well, the suits have vastly benefited New York taxpayers. We have only engaged with the administration on the merits of substantive policies, which would have a bad effect on New Yorkers. We beat them on their travel bans, which would have had a devastating effect on New York's hospitality industry, our healthcare industry, and our tech industry. We had strong support from the business sector on that fight. We have beaten them on rollbacks of environmental regulations to protect our air and our water. We have successfully intervened to defend the cost-sharing subsidies under the Affordable Care Act that would, if we don't do that, would result in a huge cut in funding for healthcare in New York. So we're saving New Yorkers money, and the reason we have to bring these suits is that the federal government has become kind of a toxic volcano of bad ideas. It's just sort of like blasting these things out on a regular basis, and this is a good test of our federalist system, because the founders of the United States did discuss the possibility of this new president they were creating becoming a demagogue, and the term they used then was tyrant, and left a lot of power at the state level. So we're fulfilling our role in the constitutional structure and protecting the people of the state of New York. I mean, if they want to try and shut down net neutrality, that would have a terrible effect on New Yorkers, individuals and businesses, so we're suing them for that. The latest example is their effort to insert a citizenship question in the census, which breaks with decades of precedent without any studies or justifications for it, and having had the statements of repeated census officials over the last 40 years that will produce an inaccurate count. A citizenship question for a state like New York that has such a large immigrant population of people, because of the atmosphere of fear created by this administration, will not come forward and respond to the census. That is not a problem for immigrants, that's a problem for all New Yorkers, because that would result in a huge cut in our healthcare funding, in our transit funding, and everything else. So we're out to protect the people of the state of New York, and look, I went after the Obama administration when I felt they weren't doing the right thing, and that'll be true of any presidential administration. These guys are just generating a little more business.
Will continuing to target the administration make New York more of a target for Trump on things like the Gateway Tunnel, for instance?
No, I mean, we're fighting on the merits, and we're fighting on the merits and the substance of the proposals. I'm not attacking the president about his family or his hair or anything else, and you won't see us tweeting at each other or anything like this. This is not personal. This is just about substantive policy.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more? Just to get into the opioid epidemic, I know you have a multi-million-dollar lawsuit you guys are working on against a pharmaceutical company. Have you guys identified any other companies that may have overprescribed, or can you just kind of generally talk about the work in that regard?
Well, it's a multi-state investigation, and there's no suit yet. There's no complaint been filed, but it's a multi-state investigation with a lot of states. I think we had initially, I think, at 41 states, and we are looking at opioid manufacturers, but also distributors, which is not something that has been done before. And we're going to look at the entire system, because there is a whole system set up, and there are different actors that are involved in different ways. We have issued requests for documents and subpoenas. We're working with our counterparts, as I say, in a lot of different states, and moving ahead. There's also a multi-district case by local governments and groups of individuals that is wrestling with these things. So there's a lot of legal action in this area, but we're moving forward deliberately to get all the information we can to determine who did what, and also to come up with practical solutions.
One more question that I can was, for one of our sister stations, they were talking about this extreme cult, it's been called the NXIVM.
NXIVM.
With Keith Rainier. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Two-part question. They were asking what took your office so long to get involved, and the DOH declined to follow up on complaints from victims. Will they be investigated by your office as well?
Well, there has been an ongoing investigation, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York has taken the lead. They have arrested Mr. Rainier, but this is after a couple of years of investigation and work. We deferred to the federal prosecutors in the first instance, which we often do, but we are in touch with them, and we have had our own inquiries on this matter. So I think that some dramatic steps have taken place in the last week or two, and I think that I don't want to comment on where we're going next with this, but you should expect to see the aggressive pursuit of Mr. Rainier and his and some of his cronies.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.